In this episode, we talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, 1990, starring Ken Foree as a doomsday prepper, Leatherface as Leatherface, an extended family of people we've never met before, and of course, the obligatory, dumb, annoying victims. Come join us as we traipse through the swamp that is this movie and discuss how this film fits in with the other two and the larger franchise, as well as doomsday prepping as a concept. Should you do it? Should we be preparing for the big boom? Come and find out. John?
Hey, Brian. How's it going?
You know, sometimes I wish we just drove instead of hiked. Do you ever have that thought?
You mean instead of being on this trail, you'd rather be in a car?
Yeah, we could get to our destination so much faster.
I wish I knew what our destination was.
Me too.
This feels to be somewhat never-ending.
It is a long hike. I think south and west is broadly where we're headed.
Yeah, we're just climbing this never-ending mountainous hill.
Yeah, and the rockier the path becomes and the more steep the grade of the climb, the more I think of nice straight highways and flat pavement and speeding cars. But hey, there's dangers on the road too, you know.
Yeah, there's potholes, there's construction, there's other drivers.
Wildlife. You could hit small creatures like armadillos.
Yeah, it's a possibility. Is this a reference to something?
Yeah, well, you know, I was thinking of an armadillo, and this armadillo was killed in a movie called Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. And the armadillo was not killed by a man with a chainsaw, but he was roadkill. I felt more sympathy for that prosthetic artificial armadillo than I did for any human victim in Texas. But I'll save those dumpster critiques for the rest of our walk today. Leatherface is back, and he has kind of an entirely new family. Did you get that sense? The barbecue stand is not featured. Instead, there's a mother. Grandpa's still around, and there's a couple of different brothers, and also a young child, a little girl. So kind of a reset of the family. Maybe these are cousins?
I got a sense that this was a complete family reset. There was a mother, it seemed. There were two brothers. I couldn't tell. Well, we can do a little plot summary. Let's do just a quick kind of run through what happened in this movie.
Well, Aragorn, before he met up with all the people and the hobbits and stuff, he lived in Texas, and he is one of three brothers, one being Leatherface, the other being a man named Tink, and Aragorn's former name was Tex. So you have Tex, Tink, and Leatherface, three brothers with a mom, and one of them must be the father of the daughter. And they are cannibals. They live on human flesh, which is provided by passing motorists on the highway. An irritating couple from Los Angeles are traveling to Texas for a reason I'm not sure of. They stop to get gas, so that's a flashback to the first film. The gas station is the focal point of where everything begins. And the crazy brother, there's four brothers, aren't there? There's Tex, there's Tink, and there's three brothers. Who's the crazy guy? I don't remember his name. His name is Little Alfredo. Little Alfredo, yeah. So you have Tex, Tink, Alfredo, and Leatherface. Four brothers.
Whole family reset. Although it's difficult to know how many of them are actual brothers, or I kind of got the sense that they might be brothers from another mother, you know? Like these are individuals within the community who, based on their similar interests in eating human flesh, decide to make their own little adoptive family.
Yeah, and along that line, unfortunately, Danny Glover is not in this movie, but Ken Foree is. More about him later. These four brothers, or cousins, or friends, these four associates, let's go with that. So little Alfredo runs the gas station. So the two annoying Los Angeles folks, Ryan and Michelle, they're driving to Texas from LA. They stop to get gas, and Alfredo is the gas station attendant, very creepy, makes lots of sexually suggestive comments while he's filling up the gas tank, and does a peeping Tom routine through the wall. And then Viggo Mortensen, who's very attractive and very smooth spoken and lovely chiseled facial features, he's like presented as the good guy, and he steps in to rescue the two of them from this creep. And there's a scuffle at the end as the two race away from the gas station, and Viggo Mortensen is shot. The movie sets you off with a pickle. Is Viggo Mortensen gonna be a good guy? There's no suggestion that he's a bad guy at all.
There's an element that you missed, actually, at the very beginning of the film, whether it's the credit roll or the title introduction. You see Leatherface hammering someone in the head and then dragging them around and filleting their face, and he makes a new mask. Although I don't remember him wearing that mask. Maybe it's an assumption that that's the mask he's wearing in this movie. And then there's this sort of feral Alien 2 Newt character. That might be a reference that you may know, Brian, or not. But in Alien 2, there was this Newt character who was part of the colony, who was separated from the other colony members when the aliens were coming through and killing everyone. Anyways, she had this sort of same quality as the young lady. Did you catch her name?
The crazy forest lady?
Yeah.
No, I don't have her name.
Let's call her Crazy Forest Lady. This had the value, I felt. There's a reference to something earlier. You're the viewer coming into the movie at the title screen. Crazy Forest Lady has seen maybe her mother or someone that she was traveling with getting slaughtered. And then she just kind of goes out into the woods as this unclaimed, unfinished slaughter process. So it brings you into the movie with already a hint that some other event we just missed happened. And then you kind of start where you started with the boring couple traveling down the road, which felt more like brother and sister. I don't think they were dating.
No, she says things in the car like, I wanted to spend quality, because she's going to go, and the guy said something, Ryan said something about Air Britannia. So I don't know if she's going to move to England or whether she's going to become a flight attendant or something, but there's a separation in their future. And she says something like, I wanted to spend quality time with you and enjoy you and that sort of thing. So I got the impression they were a couple.
Okay, fair enough.
Plus he gets all defensive when Aragorn says that she's hot. He like crosses his arms and acts all defensive mannish.
All right. Let me just kind of rocket through the rest of the movie here.
Okay.
So then through the movie, well, as that couple leaves the gas station, the person that owns the gas station appears to shoot Tex. Everyone thinks Tex is dead and chases the couple off into the sunset. Tex gave that couple a alternative route to get to their destination. Always a bad idea to take someone else's direction when it comes to shortcuts. So they take the shortcut along the way, and a truck comes up next to them, throws a coyote onto their dash. The coyote has a little earring that looks like a chromed rat's head, and this same chromed rat's head was attached to the armadillo. Little plot point.
Well, I didn't notice that at all.
Oh, really? Yeah. And
what is the chromed rat? What does that symbolize? Is that somebody's symbol or something?
The guy with the hook arm, Tink, has a chromed rat head earring. So there's this unnecessary plot element that Tink is tagging animals in a certain vicinity. This kind of plays a little bit into the idea of humans are as disposable as animals. So he's tagging, I guess that doesn't really make sense because he didn't tag the other humans with this rat skull. Anyways, that's really irrelevant. It doesn't really add anything to the movie other than it seems that Tink is going around tagging animals in the vicinity.
Like I said, didn't notice that. So, yeah, there's a lot of chainsaws and cannibalism, and Ken Foree's involved. He is out camping, prepping. He's a doomsday prepper. And quite often he goes out into the sands, the dunes, and I got the impression he was going to meet up some doomsday prepping buddies, and they were going to do some drills together. So he's stocked with a Jeep and an assault rifle and survivalist knowledge. So he's presented as a hero character, and basically the rest of the movie is the house of Leatherface and company is in a swamp, and Leatherface traipses through the swamp, and everybody else kind of stays at home. And Ken Foree fights them for a while, and Leatherface eventually kills Ryan, the love interest. And yeah, I mean, eventually there's a showdown at the house, and again, the same theme scene as in 1 and 2, where the girl is captured, tied up, presented at a dinner table to Grandpa, who's still around. And there wasn't the scene where they try to fruitlessly get Grandpa to hit the girl with a hammer. Instead, it's...
I think Grandpa at this point is dead.
You think he's done for? Yeah, he didn't really move much.
He didn't move much, and then when Ken came through with the machine gun and shot him, dust came up from him. So.
Yeah, just kind of B-movie action scenes and sound effects of Ken Foree's assault rifle, and blessedly only an hour and 21 minutes. And it was done, and I mean, that kind of sums it up, right? There was a scene earlier when Ryan and Michelle are driving before they hit the armadillo that referenced the discovery of a big body pit where 40-ish bodies had been discovered, kind of similar to the second TCM movie where the police are involved. There's a police presence, but that doesn't come up at all in the rest of the movie. And the movie felt cut up. I got that impression with the second one as well. Kind of a longer movie, a more ambitious effort that was inexpertly edited down to what we just watched.
That's a really good assessment, actually. I have a little bit of background on production. Let me share a few things. The writer intended that Leatherface at this point in time would be positioned as a angsty teenager. In part 2, it seemed like he was falling in love with the female lead and was approaching her, but in a adolescent, unaware, kind of how to talk to women way. And he was supposed to be positioned as this angsty punk rock Leatherface who was literally wearing like leather and punk rock hair, rebellious against his adults. He was fairly compliant with his previous families as he did what they said to do. He went around and chainsawed people at their request. So at this point, he's supposed to be kind of developing his own identity. That was essentially taken out of the plot. There was this idea that most of the family members would have parts of their bodies chromed. Their arms or legs would be removed, and in place would be a skeleton, chromed arm or chromed leg.
Like Tink's metal hook on his arm?
So Tink had like a metal hook, but it seemed more like it would be bones that were chromed. They didn't say why, but I'm assuming this was lending itself to the chainsaw becoming part of the humanity of the family, because the chainsaw is chromed, and maybe there's a reference to the chainsaw becoming a more substantial part of the plot line and being literally infused into the body of these family members. That also didn't happen. If you're in a pitch meeting and hearing these ideas, how would you react? Would you be like, oh, that sounds great. Punk rock, adolescent, rebellious Leatherface. Let's do it.
I think it would depend on the quality of the PowerPoint slides, but if I'm not standing and applauding at that point, I don't know what would really get my producer blood flowing. There is a big scene. They present Leatherface with a gift of a chromed chainsaw made out of chrome, which is extraordinarily large. So there's clearly, remnants of that theme of chrome.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they didn't do much with Tink's artificial limb as far as I could tell. And Tex, the character played by Viggo Mortensen, just was a complete mismatch for this movie. He was way too good looking, way too smooth talking. So in those beginning scenes, but even so, you don't suspect him as a villain, but even when he is a villain, he's still pretty smooth talking. And it's hard to see any, besides his dialogue, it's hard to see any in his look or his movements, any evil sense of foreboding or anything. So yeah, he was just Viggo Mortensen randomly put in this movie.
If you missed the chromed earrings, you probably will miss this as well.
Oh, probably.
There was a cameo. Remember Stretch from part 2?
Stretch. I'm blanking on Stretch.
She was the DJ.
Oh, right. Okay.
In this movie, she was the reporter on the street talking about the pile of bodies. She reclaimed a role in part 3.
Well, I'll have to go back and watch it. Just to say that I have.
Once I figured that out and I looked back, she wasn't even recognizable. I was like staring at her and I was like, are you sure this is the same person?
I wanted to read a little review that I found.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of putting this, it's not a sequel. What do you call it when it's the third movie in a franchise? Is there a name for that?
I think we can still use sequel.
Well, it's the second sequel. I'm quoting here. For those who saw the first 2 massacres, this will seem pretty much deja vu. All too much of 3 is rehashed horror. The first installment was genuinely shocking, unrelenting, visceral terror. 2 was camp terror, a gothic detour that cast Dennis Hopper as a good guy, albeit nuts. 3 envisions itself as a return to 1, but the new director, Jeff Burr, is no Tobe Hooper, who directed the first installment, and even the special effects seem bloodless imitations. So I was thinking of where this third installment fit with the other 2, and certainly more a return to form, I would say, more like 1 than 2 was, and definitely not so campy and comedic as 2 was. But I felt like it was going for like an action movie vibe. There's the Leatherface driving around in a car. There's that physical, really lame battle between Viggo Mortensen and Ken Foree where they just wrestle on the ground and kind of smack each other. So I felt like it was going for action movie to an extent, but just no. And then obviously the shootout. But what's your nutshell around this third installment?
There's a lot of potential that could have been developed for these characters. There's a whole cast of people, all seemingly very odd, but none of the characters were highlighted in any meaningful way that brought a sense of fascination or interest. And I agree with the action piece, where it was just a series of action sequences all filmed in the dark, which could have a sense of dooming, tension-building environment, but instead it feels it's more scattered and kind of running around and being chased, but not being chased in like a tense way, but people jumping out occasionally and you hearing chainsaws and such, but it was too pressured in its pacing without any downtime to sort of develop some level of interest in what was going on. It was just, here comes the chainsaw guy. Oh, let's run. And then later, let's run some more. But what are we running from other than just a random dude? It didn't have any depth to it. Just another little piece of information. So Jeff Burr, as the director, evidently they had offered this movie to about 15 to 20 directors, and nobody would.
Is that common or is that a lot?
It seems like a lot, and nobody wanted to pick it up. Wow. And Jeff Burr picked it up 2 weeks before filming started, and the locations were already picked. Everything was already in process. So he just kind of picked it up as it was given to him. Just to reiterate this idea of script, which had lots of texture, good ideas or bad ideas, who knows, but removing almost all of it, distilling it down to not its critical elements, but no elements, and then insert director who is just willing to be there and maybe not have the time to develop it in his own style so he can just finish this movie. I think that reflects the lack of depth within the movie itself.
Didn't you say something similar about TCM2, where that was directed by the same guy who did the first one, right?
Yeah, so Tobe Hooper did part 2, but he was trying to find a director to do that, and he couldn't find anyone. And so he ended up doing it himself reluctantly.
So this franchise has a history of people not wanting to direct it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why. The goal here, as it seemed, was to give some context.
How many pages you got there?
Section 4, part 1. To give some context of where this fits. So the movie came out in 1990. Friday the 13th, part 6 came out in 86. Then Halloween part 5 comes out in 89, another franchise. And then Nightmare on Elm Street 6 comes out in 91, a year after this was released. So the producer is probably thinking there's a string of movies that through the main character lead, they've developed a franchise of really just common elements and just change a few variables. We need to position Leatherface in this same context. let's try and get him into a franchise-driven movie product. That's the intention, I'm imagining, is what they were trying to do. Maybe they wanted to gut all the details about him because they didn't want to make him seem too textured, because Jason Voorhees is just a kid that drowned in a lake. That's it. Michael Myers is a guy who went insane as a child and killed his family members. That's it. Like, they don't even talk in these movies. So maybe they thought, well, let's get Leatherface in this, remove anything of value that might categorize him or pigeonhole him in any particular way, and let's get this franchise moving. Let's get 3 written, 4 written, 5 written, and move it along.
Yeah, just thinking of Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, those movies are menacing and those characters are scary. This third attempt now to make Leatherface, he was pretty scary in the first one, but in 2 and 3, just no tension. In 2, nothing but comedy. And now in this one, the scene that attempted to make the most tension, in my opinion, was when the two of them, Ryan and Michelle, were changing their tire in the middle of the darkness with a flashlight. And there's cutaway scenes of Leatherface's 2 legs walking towards them. But I mean, that could have been really scary and all that, but there was just no tension felt by me, at least. I'm no movie director, but you've got a pretty strong premise and a pretty 75% of the way there. First version of this movie that could have had more violence and gore to make it really over the top, and then all you got to do is push it a little further and get some competent sound effects and some competent scene editing to create some tension. It seems like a slam dunk to make Leatherface into something scary, but they can't do it.
What do you think is the missing element? Because I agree, there's potential here, and the framework exists. The name is familiar. People already associate the movie, at least the original one, with quality or with value, but they can't seem to get this chainsaw started. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they keep pulling the ripcord, but it just won't. The engine won't turn on.
Yeah, they keep priming the pump, but
yeah,
it just doesn't turn over.
They keep going to Home Depot, and trying to rent one, but there's none available.
Yeah, they buy the 3-in-1 oil, but when they put it in the chainsaw, they realize there's nothing in there.
Yeah, I mean, they keep pressing add to cart on Amazon, but the thing never ships.
Right. I mean, they...
Yeah, I think the first step, the small step, would just be to put some goddamn blood in the movie. Like, give me a close-up. Like, this movie kind of did it where... And I read again online that this thing was originally X-rated and they had to cut it down to whatever it is now. But that's impossible for me to imagine. Like, I don't know what it takes to win an X rating in 1990, but they didn't even keep the camera in the vicinity when Leatherface put the chainsaw into someone's stomach, into the little guy's stomach, Billy, Ryan, whatever his name is. There's just nothing. There's not even a suggestion that he's being, like, just add some gore, I think is the first step. Ultimately, you're creating a pattern in the viewer, the poor viewer who's watching these things in sequence. Like, Leatherface isn't really going to do anything too bad. He's just this. At this point, I feel like he's ruined for me because he's just this.
He's ruined for you. That's a little tear came down my face.
Well, I don't know. Maybe he can come back, but I'm sure one of these reboots that we watch in the future will be ungodly violent, and I'll regret saying this. But it feels too hands off, even for like late 80s movies.
Yeah. I blame the writer. I know that there's a concept that the director holds all responsibility. I share that to a degree, but I was watching part of the commentary, and the scene where the truck drives out of the gas station, which has a leather front section, covering the lights. He puts a leather face on his Ford Bronco or whatever. But as that car was driving around, the commentary was like of the director and the writer. They were like, "Yeah, so who's driving this car?" And they're like, "I don't know. Actually, who is driving this car? Isn't it so and so?" And they're like, "Well, maybe. I don't know." And so they don't even know who's driving the car in the movie they directed and wrote. So maybe a little more attention to detail or things to be in the movie for purpose. There's little demands.
One thing we haven't talked about yet, which needs to be talked about, is Ken Foree.
Oh, yeah.
He is famous for playing a survivor of, what's that movie called?
He was one of the police officers or SWAT members from Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of the Dead. And this was early 80s, late 70s, Dawn of the Dead?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a prequel to Dawn of the Dead where it was just Ken Foree as a SWAT member, and it was just him going to houses where people called in swatting events, and he just would show up shrugging his shoulders.
In this movie, he's the good guy. Like I said, he's a doomsday prepper.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fascinated by doomsday preppers. I think that there's something to be said for them being a little crazy. And I guess we can talk about a spectrum maybe of, on one end, you have a bunker under your house filled with months upon months of survival gear. And on the other end of the spectrum, maybe you have like a bug out bag with a handgun and a couple of days of food. But he seems, I guess, on the more preppery side of that spectrum. But I find these people fascinating. He talked about prepping for the big boom, I believe was his phrase, big boom.
Mm-hmm.
I interpreted that to mean nuclear war, which in 1990, with the imminent collapse of the Soviet Union, must have been at its ebb in terms of likelihood. So prepping for such an event in the 60s would have been a little more logical. But anyway, such people are interesting. He wasn't presented as crazy or outside of society's normal belief systems and so on. So doomsday prepping.
Do you prep? Are you a prepper?
I don't prep. I don't prep. But I like to have stocks of things, like, for example, canned tuna. I like to have a lot of canned tuna. And when I still have lots of tuna cans on the shelf, I think Amazon sort of prompts you to prep because you can find deals for things that are sold in bulk. I wind up, for example, Swiffer. Do you use a Swiffer?
I sometimes do, but I think that the environmental impact's a little heavy on the Swiffers.
Fair point. I have a Swiffer mop, so I mop my kitchen with one of these disposable Swiffers, and I go online to Amazon to buy another replacement pack of the wet Swiffer mops, and you can buy one where each Swiffer mop is, let's say, $1 per count, because they do the math for you on Amazon, and then you can buy a 6-pack of them, which will take you the rest of your life to use, but they're like half the price. So I feel like that's sort of Amazon and Costco as well. We're all naturally more prepared for mopping our floors during the big boom.
Yeah, I was going to say, the big one hits and you're able to make sure your bathroom floor is clean.
I'm not letting these foreign troops drape mud into my kitchen.
Well, there's also this maybe a plot element of someone buying all these Swiffer products, which then, oh, fuck it, forget it. I was going to talk about how, and then how that accelerated global warming or something, and then they have the tuna to eat afterwards. But what might be a good strategy is is there a motivation for prepping your phone book with preppers? And then that way you have a whole multitude of people you could call who have prepped. And so the only thing that you would need to do, or I would need to do, is just prep our phone books, really.
Yeah.
I'm a phone book prepper.
Scroll down to the letter P. I feel like preppers would have prepared a list of people who would try to take advantage of them. It's like people who win the lottery, they have to watch out for like long lost cousins who show up and try to become part of their lives,
Are you suggesting I'll be blackballed on the prepper books?
I'm saying that I think that's where the training comes in. Ken Foree goes out into the dunes to practice prepping with his buds and maybe forming a camp, or maybe it's the bombs have just dropped, guys. It's week 1. Let's camp out here for a week and simulate what we would do. If you're not part of those trainings and you're just calling me on the night of asking if I've got some more tuna and Swiffer, I'm going to have a list ready of people who haven't been training with me, because I think they're going to be sensitive to that, to being taken advantage of.
In the movie, Ken Foree, after all of this prep work that he's done, finds himself on the side of the road trying to load up his AR-15, and he has no bullets in it. Nothing's ready to go. And so I question whether he's as good of a prepper as we're suggesting he might be.
Well, I don't think you can have good preppers because they just need more prep. If they're not fully prepped, that's why they prep.
I don't prep. I have lots of pencils, and sometimes I do enjoy having a lot of rice. But the problem with prepping is that you have to find the perfect balance of enough prep, but not too much prep. Because if I have too much rice, then bugs will get in the rice will go bad. And now I've just wasted money and space on bad rice.
Well,
so
see,
there's
with that comment, you've just revealed your ignorance of how prepping really works, John, because of course you rotate your stocks. And you might have, instead of 1 extra bag of rice, a prepper might have 6, but you buy 1 bag of rice, put it in the back of the rice shelf, and then you use the rice that's at the front. And so you don't have problems with decay and so on because you're rotating your stocks.
Well, I have a lot to learn in this arena of preparation. You brought this up, this term prepper.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe the reason why I've distanced myself from it is, yeah, you're right. You're in this perpetual state of prepping, but you never get to the point of prepped. You don't call them preps. They're preppers.
Right.
And it's so obnoxious that I'm in this constant state of trying to get ready, but never quite ready yet for something that may never come. I think I'd be much more comfortable with a concluded title, like prepped. Maybe there's a better term, but yeah, it's like you're never truly ready. You're always in the stage of getting ready, but never ready.
Well, threats evolve over time. Nuclear holocaust, the dangers thereof wax and wane, and you have zombies to consider, and you have climate change now to consider, and there's a lot to prepare for. So maybe you go lighter on the tuna and heavier on the rice, and maybe you don't need a bunker anymore. Maybe now you need mobility to get away from rising sea levels, and threats evolve. Ken Foree presents us with a model, and yet, yeah, he's relatively inept as a rescuer. He's confused a lot during this movie, too. Just when he comes face to face with Leatherface, he says, "What the hell are you?" or "What are you doing here? You guys are doing bad things." He has all these throwaway moralistic statements, and then, yeah, sort of befuddled and not very good aim when he does shoot up the house. And eventually he comes through and saves Michelle, and they drive off together, but he doesn't strike you as, he's in the early stages of prepping, I would say.
So I have a little piece here about the middle child, at least as it seems for this Leatherface franchise. So the movie itself...
Who is the middle child of these 4 children?
I'm thinking more as the movie in its placement between 2 pulls or pushes. So you have Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 that's trying to accomplish things in the past and things in the future, which then prevent it from fully being present in the now. And this really kind of plays in with the prepper mentality as well, is that the prepper is always thinking about the future, and trying to organize its present to prepare for the future, and that future never comes. And so with this movie here, it has this history of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 and 2, which it's trying to play a little bit into. You have the grandfather character, you have Leatherface. Everyone else seems to be new. You have these elements that the previous movies have introduced, with coming to a gas station and there being a crazy guy at the gas station. You have this element of opening and slamming large steel doors. That seems to be an element. You have Leatherface as a not quite filled out character, but has a clay element to it, to where it could be many things, but isn't quite something yet. And so it's trying to incorporate these historical elements and doing it in a way that it makes sense, which it doesn't do well at. And then it's also trying to position itself as a future franchise. So they're trying to move into what the next movie looks like and the movie after that. It doesn't present itself in a way in which it can stand on its own, because it's trying to satisfy the past and the future, but not satisfying its present.
And you assign the blame to the writer, you said?
I assign the blame to the producers, actually, I would say, in this context, for they're the ones that probably removed all the more complex elements of the writing. And at the end, actually, if you remember the end, what happens is Ken Foree and the final girl kind of comes and is slouched next to a rock, and then Ken just drives up in this truck. Where to get this truck? I don't know. And rescues her. This comes out of nowhere, really, because the last scene they were in the woods, what looked like at a swamp, which I don't know how many swamps there are in Texas, but the scene just jumps into this implausible ending. Actually, what turns out is that implausible ending was tacked on. Before, the way the movie ended was Ken Foree died out there in the woods. The female lead also died out there. And when they played this in the theater for a test audience said, we like some of these characters. We like Ken Foree. And so then they went back and re-edited it and added on this end piece to satisfy the audience, but then added on the end piece because they thought, well, these characters can go into part 4 and part 5. So they're essentially sacrificing their present for the future. And no one cared about the third movie, or at least people complained about the third movie, or at least I did, to a matter of fact, that the part 1 and part 2 just weren't really implemented in any particular way. You made a potential franchise as opposed to a standalone movie.
Too much thinking about the future. Too much worrying about focus groups. Not enough artistic drive.
You gotta take the moment, Brian.
Yeah, you gotta seize the now.
You gotta put down that bag of rice. What's that?
I have to read one more review just because it's written with a lot of puns.
Oh, okay. I thought it was because I thought it was in your podcast contract to read these.
Don't get my beef jerky. Here we go. It's kind of long, but it made me giggle. Leatherface, the name comes from his mask, stitched together from victims' faces, is the most outre member of a post-nuclear family that inhabits a Texas wasteland and hunts, traps, and kills motorists unfortunate enough to be conned onto their highway to hell. They're just meals on wheels for this cannibalistic clan. Apparently the family that slays together stays together because the dinner table gets mighty crowded, what with Granddad trying not to succumb to dust, trying not to crumble to dust, excuse me. Getting excited here. I'm reading ahead, that's my problem. What with Granddad trying not to crumble to dust before he gets his servings of fresh plasma, and a fresh-faced granddaughter learning the ropes and the pulleys and the meat hooks. A wonderful collection of verbal puns and rhetorical devices there. I thought that was quite good. Well, are we all prepared for our campsite tonight, John?
I'm so prepped that I've pre-purchased a coffin, and
Nice.
I've already dug my grave. Yeah, I'm just waiting to step into that.
Good. Well, maybe I can just squeeze in next to you if you don't mind. That, ladies and gentlemen, was Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. Will there be more? Of course there will be more.
It's been a pleasure, Brian.
As always, John.